Wonderful. Well, mate, thank you so much for making yourself available. As I mentioned earlier, I'm really quite excited to have the opportunity to speak with you because, I really find one of the most crucial elements of this evolving cannabis industry is the understanding of the cannabinoid or the expression of cannabinoids in a cannabis plant. There are hundreds of compounds and they act synergistically together to create an entourage effect, an effect of multiple items to achieve a single outcome or multiple outcomes. And by removing elements of these items, the outcomes change. And you guys have now spent 4 years collating data on patients using cannabis to the point where you actually understand how the entourage effect works. So I'm really looking forward to dissecting that with you today. But before we dive into that, I did have a question that I wanted to ask around your journey. I remember speaking to you in 2017 about StrainPrint, the company that you're involved in, and how you got involved. Can you talk about your personal story as to how you found yourself working in cannabis?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thanks. I guess I started off my first career coming out of school was going into software. And I actually did work in Australia and Canberra on some special projects, and worked predominantly with security and government agencies to secure their networks, and did that globally. Came back to Canada, and started doing just general process consulting and commercialization stuff. And really wanted to get into cannabis because I had a number of things that had occurred. I had my younger son was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, which is a autoimmune disorder that affects your bowel, and it can be quite debilitating. I myself was looking to get off anti-inflammatories because I would use them for my knees. I have an arthritic knee, and then I had another good friend whose daughter had Dravet syndrome, and we had started treating her with CBD and received phenomenal results. So I had seen all of these events going on around me, and that cannabis was working for some reason or another. But when I would go to speak to a doctor, a pharmacist, or look for academic research about use of cannabis for Crohn's disease, the information was few and far between. Doctors, at the time would not seriously prescribe this. And this, we've had a medical program in Canada for about 20 years, and it's been through a number of iterations, but doctors still fear it. Pharmacists as well, even though you can purchase through pharmacy, there's a lack of understanding of the product. So, I guess we did what a software type person would do, and we built a solution to collect it. And the way we did it is understanding the complexities of entourage, and that plants change over time, and based on production methodologies or handling, light, you name it. These are all factors that affect the composition of the product. How can you actually understand what you're using and to what effect? So we created a mobile app that allows consumers to journal their use of products available in the legal supply chain. And in the early days, it was only medical patients because that was the only way to get access to the supply chain. And we provided them with a tool that would allow them to figure out, what's working for them and what is not based on their personal circumstance. So that's against 300 different medical conditions. We've tracked 28,000 illicit products, 5,000 lab verified products across 52,000 people. And generated a data set of over 1.75 million interactions. So we've got a lot of data, and I get to play around and dive through it and learn about it. So it's a data geek's dream.
I think that's just absolutely incredible that you've been able to accumulate that much data and have received support from patients. And do doctors prescribe your platform with the products? Have you built a doctor strategy where it's now used by doctors as well?
Yeah, that's exactly what we did. So the first level was get consumers using it so they can learn. And then the next thing that we want to do is give that guidance to doctors, to pharmacists, to healthcare providers that are onboarding new patients. Because these patients all have questions, much in the same way I did, or perhaps you would, being new to cannabis. And we built a series of search engine tools where they could have someone come in, either look at the data and figure out what products were ideal for that patient. And when I say ideal, I can drill down and say, I'm looking at what's the optimal product for a male like me, someone between 40 and 50 years old that is treating arthritic knees. I want to use it during the day and be alert. And if possible, I don't want something that's going to give me red eyes. I don't want that. We have the ability to search the interaction data set and make recommendations based on that fit. So we're drawing from the knowledge of, in my case, that query there might be, how does David compare to 20,000 other men that are treating this exact condition, or 3,000 people that are treating endometriosis, or 5,000 people that are using it for insomnia. So the numbers are quite large. So it tells an interesting story.
I'm curious about the comment. So the comment you made before, which I completely appreciate and agree with, is the delicacy of the plant material and how the environmental circumstances will change the expression of the plant. So it will change the chemical makeup. Let's say there's only 10 products that are recommended through the engine for arthritic knee. How can you ensure, or what are your, how do you ensure that the product that's being then recommended is available? Because there's so much product being developed in Canada, and some of it's going to be grown in a particular environment, others will be grown and then stored for 2 years. All of these factors will then change what the product will look like for the patient. How do you guys account for something like that?
So the nice thing about the program and the way it's rolled out in Canada is there's a variety of standards about the way the product is handled, how long it's legally allowed to be on the shelves. All the provincial retailers have specific restocking ordinances if something needs to be returned or doesn't sell. So those mechanisms are designed to make sure that people get access to fresh product that is reasonably close to what it's supposed to be on the label. In practice, obviously, that doesn't always work. Like, you walk in there and you get something that is 6 months old. That's not something I'm interested in buying. You still will find product like that in some of the stores. Most of them aim to retail product that is, within 3 months of age. There are, as we look to other formats, and within those products, the flower products and the oils, if we're looking at the medical supply chain, which is either dealing direct with the grower, the licensed producer, or with a national retailer like Shoppers Drug Mart, or other retail online ventures, there's the ability to make sure that we're interfacing with their supply chain. I'm only going to recommend something that's available in Ontario if it's for sale in Ontario. We regularly will look at the data set, and we will look at the product selection that's available in each region. And if we notice that it's no longer available for sale, we have aging protocols to take them out of the system. So we don't want to recommend products that aren't available in your region.
Yeah, okay. That's a good way to account for that. I'd be concerned about that consistency of supply, but that's a good countermeasure.
Yeah, I mean, consistency of supply is an issue in the recreational supply chain where they'll dump whatever they can get into that market, and good product there is judged based on its THC count, not based on the other variables that, frankly, for the rec market, there's other components that get you high. It's not just THC.
Yeah, I've been reading about Delta 8, which apparently has a lower anxiolytic outcome for people. But let's circle back to the data points, because I love asking this question. You've got access to a significant amount of data. What are you most excited about, and why?
I mean, our business has gone through a bit of a metamorphosis, so I actually find myself really excited these days. Before COVID, our focus was really on working with clinics, NLPs, and government agencies to build visibility of patient use. And we've continued to do that through COVID and dealing with that schedule, but it's also afforded us the ability to go very deep into the data. So what's come out the other end of this is a new outcomes-based formulation business, where we are now working with brands and pharmaceutical companies and consumer packaged goods companies that are looking to develop cannabis-infused product that have targeted outcomes. So whether it's a beverage that, where parameters are, I want this to be used during the day. I want this to also combat anxiety or depression. I want this to make people talkative. I want it to have a general bright feel. And I want to target this to the female audience. What is the optimal formulation for that circumstance? We can specify that in terms of, here are the cannabinoids, here are the terpenes and their relative concentrations to render that outcome. So we're doing that now across the pharmaceutical and therapeutics side of the business, assisting drug companies in designing targeted products for things like joint pain or insomnia or post-traumatic stress disorder. We've also designed products for fibromyalgia. That's been the really fun part, is being able to now look through the data, learn from it, and make recommendations that'll, again, help patients by delivering targeted therapies.
So I'm sure you've got quite a few formulations in the oven that are cooking. What's the most baked opportunity from a formulations perspective? Can you talk about a case study and how far it's progressed? Because what I'm interested to understand is, you've got these data points to say, okay, of the patient cohorts that we've looked at, we can see these 5 strains have been quite effective. And what are the commonalities? Okay, well, there's these terpenes and these cannabinoids, and then there are these variable cannabinoids that are appearing in 2 out of 3 products. How do you then distill that into an end product and then validate that for patient use?
Great question. So first of all, when we're looking at isolating the behaviors, the first thing we're going to do is pick a user population. So we're going to say it's targeted at this user. It's male and female between the ages of 30 and 50 with arthritis that have knee and elbow pain, and we want something that is functional during the day so they don't get sleepy. Pull the data, time of day use, genders, age ranges, pull all anxiety records, and focus on knee pain and elbow pain. It's going to present a data set, and this is a behavioral data set of the way that various patients who are completely anonymized. I should also mention all of our data is privacy compliant under HIPAA, PIPEDA, and FIPA regulation. So we do it in a secure way so that no one is in a bad way. And then we will look at the groupings and the number of people that are driving interactions. So it's not unusual that if we were to do a poll like that, I would find products where we've got 3,000 individuals that have used product A 8,000 times. Or we'll have some products that here's a product that's used by 1,200 patients and it's been used 22,000 times. So there's a high degree of, it's a longitudinal data set. We look at it over time, we look at the trends. So we start to learn, what does an average dose like? What is an optimal dose? When we're looking at the way it renders and the differences in the top rated products, we compare the behavioral data set against the chemical data set. We start to do what's called driver analysis. And what it does is, through statistical processing, is it starts to tell us, in all of the compositions that we've looked at, the following cannabinoids and terpenes are either additive as a key driver, or they're subtractive. So it's going to tell us what improves the situation, what takes away from the situation, and it's that analysis that starts to tell us what is driving the interaction. And it's about the entourage effect, and it's often as much about the terpenes as it is about the cannabinoids.
So with the companies that have their products available, what level of data do you have access to? Do you get the COAs?
Yep. Yeah, so we have about 5,000 listed products in the system where we have C of A's. You know, there's still variation in quality of C of A's depending on region or what have you. Fortunately, Canada has some stricter enforcement in terms of what's required by labs. So they do all the base toxicity screening. They look for pesticides, herbicides, ticks, mold, that type of stuff, heavy metals, and then they look at cannabinoids and terpenes. The only thing that sometimes is challenging is that terpenes are optional to report under the program right now, and we've always had to go and do, work directly with the producers to get it. Now consumers are starting to demand terpene content, so it's getting easier to collect that data. In some cases, we get it directly from the manufacturer. In other cases, they will have menu files that they are exposing, XML files. It's part of their seed to sale programs where they will have cross links to C of A's. And then in other circumstances, we will scrape it from production websites where we have relationships to do so.
Okay, yeah, and so you've got the formulations now that you've hypothesized over. What happens next? Because I want to understand a case study because they're going to. I anticipate people watching. There would be companies that would be interested in understanding this process. So you've got a hypothesis for a formulation. Can you give me a case study or the most advanced case study for a company that's taken this and run tests on it? Because obviously then there's the validation stage where we now need to go and look at this in animal models, and in human data needs to be collated. So how far has this gone? Because you said this is a recent kind of pivot.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the unique things about this is doing clinical work in cannabis is really difficult because of the instability of the chems in the plant. So there's 450 bioavailable or bioaccessible chems in the plant. Those are cannabinoids or flavonoids, and they're terpenes. But we really don't have a true idea of how the impact of those changes, of those chemical compositions will alter our outcomes. So what you need to do is you can either put it out as a therapeutic where you're not making claims, and that's the way the majority of these formulations are coming out. Like everyone has blended oils or blended vape cartridges. They're making representations that they're good for this or that, either through the rumor mill or through naming conventions of the product. But when you look at how they're deriving their formulations, they probably have someone that's been building cartridges or oils for a long time, but there's no real science that they can point to. So we're looking for to work with therapeutic companies, pharmaceutical companies, or larger consumer packaged goods companies that are either in the beverage space or the traditional food and beverage space, or folks that are looking to market vitamins. There's a very large hemp market, as an example, in the US, where they're looking for target effect. It doesn't always have to be about here's a cannabinoid drug. However, for what we do really well is we provide a predictive measure based on behavioral response for the way a person's going to a compound, if you will, that we put together. The first thing that they're usually going to do is, when they do that, is a study. Where they measure if it's actually making a difference. They might do blood, they might do urine. They, depending on what's being tested, they might use standardized questionnaires to judge efficacy. Ultimately, a lot of these companies, their goal, especially pharma, is to take it through clinical trial. But with 450 chems that make up the fabric of cannabis, that's a lot of variability and volatility. So what we do is we're taking out a lot of the guesswork for that preclinical study. And one of our partners in Europe that we're developing fibromyalgia and other drugs for, or targeted drugs for, they told us that we cut their time to market by 18 months by doing the study on our platform. We are now at the point with two parties where they've sourced biomass, which is the recommended feedstock for the product. They've isolated that they add, and we've been meeting with formulation experts. These are the real chemists. And translating the formulation into working compositions. So some of these are delivered as emulsions, where we're changing the solubility of the cannabis by making it water soluble. Some of the targets will also require processing to increase stability. As an example, when working in beverages or consumer packaged goods, we want to put products out that are going to be shelf stable for 12 months, because it's not as telling as flour is, where if you have flour that's mishandled, it crumbles in your hand, or it's just not a good experience, or it doesn't smoke well. With edibles or drinks, you don't know about the experience until after you've consumed it. So we want to make sure that they're consistent as possible. And when you're a brand, whether you're talking about a McDonald's hamburger that's the same no matter where you go, or a can of Coca-Cola, or a beer, or whatever it is, those manufacturers all have a strict idea of what should be in their product and not, because it's going to drive a consistent brand experience. The same thing is coming to cannabis. It's and that's what all these major investments by these beverage companies is bringing into the market. Folks like Constellation are charge, obviously, with canopy. We also see new entrants like Molson Coors with Hexo. Anheuser-Busch InBev is also made moves into the market. They are all, really focused on driving a consistent brand experience. So,
yeah, okay. I think, look, because I think insular, I'm looking at this from a medical perspective, and very much looking at how, because in Australia it's a strict medical market. There may be a move to the over counters in the next year, but right now it's medicine. So I think about this from the medicine's perspective, but
Yeah,
it's a completely different environment for Europe, the UK, America, where they've got flexibility for more consumable products, and creating outcomes that are derived
exactly.
from this data. So it makes sense. I think that the highest threshold of challenge would be sitting in that pharmaceutical space, because you've got to, as you just mentioned, I mean, even recomposing that profile. So let's say you can identify there are 4 cannabinoids and 5 terpenes. You can derive those terpenes from natural botanicals, but getting those cannabinoids and isolating or fractionating them, that's where the
Hmm.
challenge comes in for larger pharmaceuticals. But it does create a means for you to create a replicable formula that's consistent batch after batch. And that's the
Yeah.
goal. That's the goal.
Yeah, and the other thing that you're saying is when a lot of pharma looks at it, what they really want to do is the same thing doctors want. They want to understand that there's a specific dose, that the molecule never changes, and they can prescribe it and it's got an outcome.
Mm,
That's why a lot of clinical practitioners are uncomfortable with cannabis, because they can't nail it down that same way. To the They're willing to turn a blind eye to personal experience, right? Um, I think in terms of driving those formulations, they want to make it possible, because that's how they support their supply chain. That's how they export product. That's how pharma works. And for that, a number of pharmaceutical companies are looking beyond natural cannabinoids, and what they're actually doing at biosynthesis
mm, mm,
of cannabinoids, and that's either in things like microbiology, it is in bacteria, and also in yeast. And the reason why they're looking at those technologies for growing cannabinoids is because they can control the grow environment, the cost of production is lower, and higher stability.
mm.
Wants to go with this, because it's a supply chain really well is honestly within the therapeutic market, and that's kind of its sweet spot.
Mm. So let's pivot now onto the data, because that's where
Sure.
the crux of my interest sits. Um, what's most surprised you about the data that you've accumulated? Out of all the things that you've seen, what's been one of the most surprising outcomes that you've been able to derive from the data set?
Oh, I mean, one of the things that's been really interesting for me is looking at patient behavior or consumer behavior over the time of COVID. Right, like when I look at the general way we track interaction on the system, the top symptoms that we typically treat are sort of joint pain, muscle pain, anxiety, insomnia, inflammation, and these are in order of priority.
Mm,
Then we go into depression, joint stiffness, headache, and stress. So that's the general data set. But if I actually look at the last 90 days as an example, the interesting thing is that anxiety has raised to the top rated use and most frequent use in the data set, followed by insomnia. There's a lot of people that are not sleeping. And now we start to see joint pain. Depression is now the fifth symptom. Um, Irritability has reared its head. So we're starting to see more behavioral or mental health or applications of cannabis in because of COVID, I think, and because of the isolation, we're seeing sales go up across the board. But the rationale for use is clearly changing. So I like to study those types of behaviors. Also, is interesting is the way people drive discovery in different supply chains. In Canada, a lot of the products are available in medical, in regular supply, and from time to time in recreational locations. So people try to deviate into the recreational stores because it's around the corner and it's easier for them as a therapeutic user. But they're ultimately coming back to the medical channels because they're learning about the importance of stability of supply. So
Interesting.
yeah, it's really interesting, and the producers here are also rearranging their growth cycles accordingly to meet those needs.
So I find that fascinating. So because I found that I read an article recently that Canadian patients are migrating from medical to adult use so that they've got more choice or flexibility in what they can purchase. But you're saying now that they're moving back to the medical supply because of the
depending on the severity of what they're treating. And if you're serious, so if you're looking at multiple sclerosis, if you're looking to treat severe nausea because you've got cancer pain, or any of those severe, like things like inflammation, where you're treating joint inflammation or gut inflammation or depression or anxiety. If you are truly treating one of those symptoms in place of a prescription drug, then you've got expectations of that as a therapy, and you need consistency of supply. So it really, I think it comes down to the profile of the patient and the use application. The thing for me is I know what works very well for me for about 6 or 7 conditions because I've been tracking on StrainPrint. If I want to, there's a difference between me using a cannabis strain or cultivar for a medical application versus me going out and wanting to try a pre-roll with my mates, right? Cannabis is interesting in that, unlike alcohol, you don't think of alcohol as a medicine, you think of it as social, but cannabis can actually be both, and oftentimes recreational or non-medical use is actually therapeutic, right? Like mood elevation, sleep, getting rid of stress. These are, the most common uses, we know are like stress, anxiety, insomnia, muscle pain, depression, headaches, inflammation, joint pain. If you have these consistent problems, you're for something that works consistently. There are lots of people in the medical supply chain that love cannabis and they want to try other products. The other thing is that in Canada, at least, the other formats, which we call version 2, those products first started in the black market. Those are things like shatters and resins and vape cartridges, and various extracts like hydrocarbon extracts. It's only been within the last year that those formats have come online. So if people wanted to get that stuff, they were either going black market or now focusing on the rec stores to get those products. We are seeing national interests like Shoppers Drug Mart, where they are now selling a broad mixture of about 100 different products, including a variety of different formats: topicals, edibles, gel caps, flour, calibrated vapes, like stuff from Dosist, as an example. You're starting to you see a lot of formats creep back into the medical program to meet the needs of the patients.
I find that really fascinating, and I like that there's been such strong buy-in from places like Shoppers Drug Mart. I wanted to kind of circle back onto the people that are now using cannabis. There's obviously, you've just mentioned a variety of different formats. Can you talk about the formats that are most popular per condition? Are you able to kind of break it down? So for people with anxiety, is there a preference towards flour or oils or vapes? For people with insomnia, is there a preference? Can you provide some insights there?
You're gonna make me pull up data, aren't you?
By all means, I don't think anyone's going to be slightly concerned at all if there's some data that's provided, because ultimately that's the again, this is just a teaser, and for anyone that wants to follow up, I highly recommend looking at StrainPrint. But the reality is these are pivotal information pieces, because the patients have the opportunity to choose in a much more freely structured way without government. Like in Australia, it's all approved by the federal government, by the TGA, application after application, and it's much stricter from a product accessibility perspective. Canada seems to have a lot more flexibility. So I'm personally interested to know, okay, well, what is it that people with anxiety are leaning towards, both from a formulation perspective and from a product perspective, and then same for sleep. So if you're open to it, if you're happy to, I'd love to explore that data.
Sure. Let me just pull some data here.
I don't see any comments with anyone opposing to this idea, so I think we've got a green light.
Let me just do some data ranking here so I can make sense of this. Okay, so so what I've done is I've looked at the top methods based on efficacy for anxiety in this case. And when we look at this, we look at genetics across a couple of different vectors. So different formats. Sometimes we're looking at oils. We also look at cultivars that are provided by multiple providers, batch by batch. So we see variants. But in terms of highest efficacy for consumption, typically when looking at mental health applications, doctors are going to hate that I say this, but it is smoke or vape that leads to the most rapid relief. There's good reason for that, and that's because of the speed of uptake. So you have a rapid onset, first of all, through the lungs of about 5 to 10 minutes. You also have a reasonable offset, and an offset is the duration of the treatment, and relief is near instant relative to other methods because it's got a decent bioavailability factor. When we do calculations around, I've got a joint, it's about 0.5 gram, and I'm going to take 10 puffs off it. What does that equate to into consumption? We look at things like that and say, well, roughly based on this method, we'll assign a factor of around 36%. If we go and we look at an oil as an example, which are very common for long duration treatments, the challenge with oils for some patients, especially with anxiety, is the speed of time in which the effect comes on or the relief comes on. So in some cases with MCT based oils, you're looking at 60 to 90 minutes before onset effect occurs. So, and the bioaccessibility is very low for oil. You're looking at 20% around. Some are low down to 10%. So you're not getting the same dosage. It is delivered over a longer period of time. So what some people do is they combine vaping or smoke with an oil, so they get that rapid improvement, and then it carries them over a 6 to 8 hour period. So these are things that we see. There is a lot of oil use, specifically CBD for oil. People are using it as a preventative measure. And they're looking at doses in the what am I looking at here? So like 2 to 5 milligrams as a preventative dose. We see with oils repeated dosing behavior up into the 20 milligram range over the course of the day when looking at oils. What other formats can I look at?
with that dosing, is that because that would make sense to me? So I'll give you some background context. The TGA, the Therapeutics Goods Administration, is looking at rescheduling CBD next year to Schedule 3 at a maximum of 60 milligrams per day. So that would basically be, you've got 20 milligrams in the morning, 20 milligrams in the afternoon, 20 milligrams in the evening. Based on what you've just shared, that would be that could be an effective means for treating or alleviating conditions such as anxiety. So that supports that position then.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I use CBD for. I do take an oil in the morning. I've got my son who's in second year university. When he gets stressed out, I give him CBD. It allows him to focus. It cuts the anxiety right away. It allows him to focus. It's really about figuring out what your level of function is, right? In Canada, it's when we look at formats, a lot of the times when we're looking at edibles or pills or tinctures, they will limit the dose to 10 milligrams, which oftentimes is too low a dose for medical patients. Some of them are up in the 20 mg per dose. Some extreme cases, we see people that when treating with oil or combined flower, they're in some extreme cases in 1,200 milligrams a day. But that's incredibly extreme. It's not unusual to see a patient that's doing anywhere from 40 to 80 milligrams in a day.
Okay. And that's CBD you're referring to?
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing is there's this race towards, specifically you see this in the US, where every single product in the drugstore now contains hemp CBD.
Yeah.
And it's all really the same stuff. It's distillate, the quality is suspect and what have you. But as a result of all these CBD products, there's been liver toxicity studies that have been done.
Interesting.
Yeah, so they're now seeing in doses, this is not my research, this is my reading, that in doses around 750 milligrams a day, they're starting to see liver toxicity. So, it's about making sure. Now, I don't know very many people that can afford a daily habit of 750 milligrams, because that would be quite pricey to maintain. Certainly you see dosing like that in some animal applications.
Yeah, and for epilepsy patients in particular. But yeah, that's been a concern of mine, is the rapid uptake of CBD without long-term toxicity studies. So it's good to know that there are researchers that are looking into this, because I think it's a very important factor that often gets forgotten when it comes to the hype of this industry. It's very important to understand that there are outcomes or side effects to these medicines. Now, fortunately, the side effect profile for cannabis is much less severe than other pharmaceutical drugs, but by no illusion, this is a panacea that has no side effects. So I particularly think it's an interesting position to consider when looking at the consumable market and how these cannabinoids are being consumed as kind of supplements as opposed to medicines. And that's where it becomes somewhat murky, because there aren't long-term studies on the application of CBD as a supplement. Just they don't exist. They're only starting to come out now.
I agree.
So
I agree.
It's one of those don't just put it in the water. Let's
exactly. Let's be mindful of what we're doing. Right.
Yeah. It puzzles me when people come out with that position, but understandably, it's a business that excites people, and a business needs to survive, and consumer demand supports that. But at the same time, there is a safety consideration.
A little bit of insanity going on.
Tiny bit, it seems. So let's. I want to. So we've spoken about some items around patients now, and I want to broach back to that topic if we get time. But
Sure.
Does your platform track why people are dropping off the medicine?
It does track. So there's a couple of things that I think are relevant. So first of all, yes, drop off does occur, and it typically, after 3 to 4 months of using the app, what we find is that consumers get things dialed in. They learn about microdosing or the optimal dose for their application. They learn about the way they respond personally to products, and they learn which genetics or cultivars they want to look for in market. So we see that they typically will come back to the platform when there's a new malady that they've got to deal with. We provide guidance within the explore section where if I said, okay, well, I'm treating for knee pain, but I'm having my back is all spazzed out, the muscle, I can't move my back. What should I use? You can go into the platform and say, what products would you recommend for either spasticity or muscle pain? And it's going to make recommendations. So we have people that come back in and they will recalibrate themselves quite frequently. We also have, we're running a variety of studies on the platform as well for academic and medical research, where the patients have to work within protocols to report to be part of studies. And there's additional calibrated diagnostics that they'll respond to. So in those cases, they're prescribed to be on the platform for a specific period of time. So we've got different user cases. And the other thing that we do to keep people engaged is we have a reward system built in where we present people with their data so they can learn, which is great. But the other thing we do is we incentivize them. Every time they provide us with data, we give them what we call our strain points. And you can accumulate those points to get all sorts of cool stuff like t-shirts, hats, grinders, vaporizers. In markets where it's legal, you can get discounts from certain producers. And one of the things we've been doing over COVID actually is we've been converting points to Amazon gift cards and grocery gift cards to allow people that are having trouble to make ends meet. They can cash in their points for groceries and stuff. So that's kind of how we incentivize people to participate. We're also analyzing the data to make sure that we're not being taken advantage of and gamed, because that type of data doesn't help the science. It doesn't really help the patient. So we're always analyzing and learning in that way from the behavioral perspective. One of the things that was really interesting to me was this past year we also conduct surveys. So we do stuff on things like endometriosis and insomnia and stuff. But on this topic, we were talking about polypharmacy behavior. And
yep.
We wanted to understand, once people start treating with cannabis in a calibrated way, what happens to their relationship with other products. So they could be anti-inflammatories, they can be painkillers, they can be any number of standard over-the-counter drugs, right? Or behavioral drugs. So we had 1,000 people respond that are registered in the program, and for over-the-counter drugs like Tylenol or Advil, they were seeing that 62% reduced their use of those products while using cannabis. 51% of them stopped using the product. So they switched to cannabis. So in the larger data set, not looking at pain, but in the larger, of the 1,000 people that we tested, 41% of them had completely switched to cannabis in favor of over-the-counter or prescription for their needs. 43% of those surveys dramatically reduced their use of over-the-counter prescription. only 16% continued with their existing molecular drug regime. So we're seeing changes in behavior because people like the effect, and you're no longer stacking side effects on top of side effects. A lot of people are able to simplify what they're putting into their body with a good effect.
So with those patients in that study, I'm presuming that there was no specific indication that was being treated. It was a broad patient population.
It is a broad patient population. We identify them based on their diagnosis, based on their gender, based on a whole bunch of things. We've actually published the report. It's available for download on our website. So if you guys would like to learn more, you can head over to StrainPrint and download a copy. We're happy to educate people as we learn ourselves.
So I had a question come in around microdosing. Do you have any data about microdosing different cannabinoids, mainly THC and CBD, and what constitutes as a microdose?
So looking at the data, microdosing, some people, it's really open to interpretation, to be honest. I consider a microdose anything beneath, 2 milligrams. 2.5 milligrams is typically when you consider that a typical therapeutic dose is deemed to be around 10 milligrams. And as we said, often some people treat with much more, approaching 20 mg. So 2.5 mgs is seen as a reasonable microdose when it comes to THC. In terms of microdosing outside of THC, there's not a lot of call for microdosing CBD. It's not a behavior we see. And as far as the other cannabinoids, as much as I would love to tell you that I've got people microdosing cannabigerol and cannabicromium and CBN to sleep better, I mean, they're consuming full spectrum products that have these components, but not in isolation. We are seeing now a variety of distillate or isolate-based products come online that give you more flexibility and better bioavailability by, enabling absorption within the mucosal membrane in your mouth, where you're getting bioaccessibility of 40 to 50% in some cases based on the size of the droplet. Those are going to also, if they're commercialized the right way, have the propensity to change the way people dose dramatically.
Yeah.
Because you can take, if you think about what you can do, is you can take a 10 milligram dose that, if it was rendered as oil, would effectively deliver 2 milligrams. And if you used a 40% conversion, that 10 milligram dose is now delivering 4 milligrams, and it's bypassing your liver. So there's a bunch of exciting stuff in terms of delivery methods that are coming on. We're seeing those in topical applications, in sprays, and also in some capsule form.
Okay. I'm particularly interested about these delivery formats, but let's talk about cannabinoids for a moment. What cannabinoids and terpenes are the most intriguing come across in the platform? Because you guys can hone in on specific cannabinoids and terpenes. Can you talk to me a bit about what's exciting in this space? What's going on?
Sure. So I mean, in terms of, I guess I'll start with cannabinoids. So THC and CBD, everyone knows.
Yeah.
There's a lot of vectors of people looking at CBN for sleep. In terms of advancing science, their CBG and CBC are key development vectors for the reason that they're anti-mutagenic, and they are also People believe that they're good to treat things like bowel inflammation, psoriasis, and some severe autoimmune disorders. CBG right now, you have specialized strains and extractors, but the pricing for some of these components is still outside of the reach of standard consumer use, where, as an example, if I'm looking at a kilogram of the CBG extracted oil that I'm going to make into a distillate or whatever, it is not uncommon for that CBG to be about $85,000.
Yeah, wow.
Wow. When I would compare that to CBD, I'm looking at $3,000 to $5,000. Some people can get it way cheaper, but these more exotic cannabinoids that are being researched right now, there's got to become a better way to bring them to the forefront and to emphasize them. So there's a lot of exciting work there. And personally, as my personal motivation around my son with Crohn's, I'm all there to advance any CBG research. We are also seeing access, use of the acids in a very like THCA, CBDA, CBGA, specifically in topical applications. So pre-decarb, obviously. In terms of the terpenes, realistically, there's about 30 or 40 terpenes that are being reported on now. When you look at the products, it's hard to know about the complete entourage because the labs are reporting based on what they're mandated or told to report on. So to do a broader scan of a product, you can get 30, 40 terpenes. In Canada, the government doesn't mandate the producers to test to that level. Some of them do, but the ones that we see most often in terms of application, so alpha-pinene, we see humulene quite a lot, obviously beta-caryophyllene, borneol, and these terpenes have pain reduction capabilities. They have anti-inflammatory capabilities, anti-mutagenic capabilities. And the interesting thing about terpenes is we've also got things like campine. We've got one that, in topicals that speeds absorption into skin is geraniol. We see linalool, myrcene, which interestingly is used for energy. Like if you think about you think about mangoes in some cultures, they use that to provide energy, like caffeine. But in a lot of cases, we see myrcene in strains that make people sleepy.
So sedative.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah. So, but typically, what we're seeing is that myrcene is gonna pair with humulene, and then also you'll see campine in there. So we start to see that terpenes appear in clusters, much in the same way that cannabinoids do. So depending on, and I think my favorite terpene recreationally, because it makes me feel good, is strains that are higher in terpinolene. So I find that terpinolene really gives me a feeling of euphoria, or makes me feel floaty. So it's interesting to see the combinations that pick out of the data.
That's my by all means. I keep going. I love it. This is really what I wanted to kind of dig into is, what's commonly being used and why is it being used? So any other nuggets you can share?
Yeah, so I think the other thing that I think I'd really love people to understand is that the whole dichotomy around, is it a sativa, is it a indica, really doesn't mean much of anything these days. So sativa people typically associate with up, satellite, sativa, and I like to say couch for indica. Which is one elevates you and one takes you down. And the interesting thing, when we looked at insomnia as an example, and we looked at men and women, and we looked at their use of genetics and what was working for them, the interesting thing was the way they were categorized. So yes, we had users that gravitated towards indica, but where we started to see interesting things was, well, CBD is also really effective at helping people sleep, and it doesn't have THC in it. Oh my gosh, sativa is helping people to sleep. We're looking at sativa hybrids. So this whole categorization of a genetic category driving an outcome or an experience is not true, right? We are also seeing that the levels of THC in terms of helping people to sleep. For men, as an example, men typically need a higher amount of THC over women to sleep. When we look at the terpenes that are driving those interactions, we're seeing in the formulation. So myrcene is key. We've got beta caryophyllene is key. We have Neridol, and also the shocker. One of the shockers for me was limonene. So limonene, for me, I always associate it with a brightness or awakening, or it's that citrus smell. Yet it is an important component of sleep remedy. If I look at men, they're actually using the same concentrations, but the terpenes are in a lower dose. So in men, we're seeing it's the THC that is driving the response. In women, there's something else going on, because it's the higher concentration of these terpenes and a lower dose of THC that is helping them to sleep.
Fascinating. We've passed an hour now, so I respect that I've asked you for an hour and I can close off, but I'd love to do a part 2 and continue diving into this, because these are the nuggets. And if anyone's interested, StrainPrint has a lot more data that they can show you. This is really just a scraping of the surface. But David, it'd be really good to get you back on to go deeper, because ultimately that's, I feel, the next phase of evolution in the cannabis industry is starting to become more specific and intentional around the use of these specific compounds, or to create outcome medicines or outcome products. One last question. Synthetics. Have you got any data on synthetics? Synthetic CBD?
Not anything that I can necessarily provide guidance on. Synthetics obviously get a very bad rap, because there's the experience of the pharma-derived synthetics today. What I'm really excited for is the biosynthetics that are coming on, when we start to see products that are made out of yeast or algae or bacteria, and those products are just starting now to come online. So over the last couple of years, they've been bench. It's easy to do this at small lab scale, but when you've got to scale up into commercial production, where you're producing tons of an input, that gets difficult. So it's early for the industry. We do have people on the system that are treating use of Sativex or Epidiolex, those, and those, but those are actually plant derived. There are a couple out there. I believe Bayer distributes Marinol, that has had some bad rap, but we haven't seen enough data about it yet. I mean, frankly, those synthetics for patients are very expensive. So if you're being prescribed those products, it's for a reason. You're undergoing cancer treatment or HIV, wasting symptoms. That's when they'll prescribe those. So it is limited.
Okay. Well, part 2 to come. Thank you, David. That was an absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed that. And I think what I've learned from this is these need to be longer and not necessarily live, because I think the nuggets come out towards the end. I really want to get you on again to talk more specific on these data points. So,
Sure.
I'd love to have you again. And thank you so much. That was an absolute pleasure. Really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure here too. I enjoyed the chat.
Yes, ditto, mate. Well, take care, and thanks for everyone for tuning in. Really appreciate the time.
Have a good night, everyone, or good morning.
Take care. Good early afternoon. Good early afternoon.
There we go. We'll go with that. You guys are in summer. I'm going into winter. A bah humbug.
And a second stage lockdown. Good luck.
Yes. You had to remind me there. Thanks so much.
You'll be fine. Awesome, David. Take care and all the best.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.